Welcome to the channel. Tonight's story is called The Lighthouse That Never Slept. On a lonely stretch of the American Atlantic coast, a lighthouse keeper begins noticing a mysterious light deep beneath the ocean. What starts as a simple observation slowly becomes a journey into an ancient mystery hidden beneath the waves. Before we begin, please subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our future sleep stories. Now, get comfortable, relax, and let the sound of the ocean carry you into tonight's adventure. Let's begin. In 1923, on a jagged stretch of the American Atlantic coast, stood a lighthouse known only as Ravenpoint Light. It was not famous, it was not visited, it simply existed, like a silent guardian carved into stone. Elias Ward was its keeper. He arrived in late autumn, when the sea already sounded like distant thunder. The locals in the nearest fishing town warned him, the coast changes moods here. The light is not always just a light. Elias didn't believe in such stories. He believed in schedules, oil lamps, and mechanical precision. Every night, he climbed the spiral stairs inside the lighthouse, wound the great lens system, and lit the beacon. The beam cut through fog like a slow, patient sword. But something strange began on his third week. Sometimes, when the light rotated across the water, Elias noticed another glow, answering back. Not from a ship, not from shore. Something deeper, like the ocean itself was blinking. He wrote it off as fatigue, until the night the sea blinked twice. By the fifth night, Elias could no longer dismiss it. The lighthouse beam swept across the Atlantic in its steady rhythm, one full rotation every minute, like a heartbeat the coast depended on. But now, every time the light touched a certain stretch of water, something answered back. A faint glow, pale, almost silver, not rising like a ship's lantern, but appearing like it was already there, waiting under the surface. Elias leaned closer to the glass. The sea was unusually calm that night. No storms, no wind strong enough to explain the shimmer. Yet the glow returned every rotation, perfectly timed with his lighthouse beam. He checked the equipment. Oil level, normal. Lens, clean. Mechanism, unchanged. Everything obeyed logic. Except the ocean. At 2:13 a.m., he made a decision he would later question. He shut off the lighthouse for exactly 10 seconds. The moment the beam disappeared, the glow in the water did too. Complete silence followed. Then, slowly, the ocean lit up again, on its own. Elias stopped treating it like coincidence. Over the next several nights, he began recording everything. Time of each glow, direction of the lighthouse beam, wind speed, tide movement, even cloud density. A pattern emerged. The ocean wasn't just responding, it was mirroring him. When the beam slowed slightly due to mechanical delay, the underwater glow also delayed. When he changed the rotation by even a fraction of a second, the sea adjusted its response. It felt impossible, yet it was precise. One night, Elias tried something different. Instead of the usual rotation, he paused the beam directly facing the open water. The glow beneath the sea didn't vanish. It waited. Then it slowly formed a perfect circle, directly aligned with the lighthouse. Elias felt a cold pressure in his chest. Not fear exactly, but recognition. Like something on the other side had been observing him for far longer than he had been watching it.
he whispered into the empty room. This isn't reflection. It's communication. And for the Elias couldn't sleep anymore. The lighthouse had become something between a machine and a question mark. Every night, he reduced his movements, testing whether the ocean would still respond with less input. It did. So on the 7th night, he tried something deliberate. Instead of the usual rotation cycle, Elias tapped the glass lens housing 3 times, slow, evenly spaced. It was irrational, but he needed to know if there was anything beyond mechanical coincidence. The ocean answered. Not with light immediately, but with delay. Exactly 3 seconds passed. Then, beneath the surface, it repeated the same rhythm. 1 glow. Pause. 2 glows. Pause. 3. Elias stepped back. His pulse tightened in his throat. The ocean wasn't just reacting anymore. It was learning. And in that quiet realization, the lighthouse beam suddenly felt less like illumination and more like a language being spoken back to him. Elias changed his approach. If the ocean was responding to patterns, then unpredictability should break it. So for the first time in weeks, he stopped the lighthouse beam mid-rotation and left it off longer than usual. No rhythm, no timing, just darkness cutting into the sea like a missing piece. At first, nothing happened. The ocean stayed black, quiet, almost relieved. Elias waited. 10 minutes passed, then 20. He exhaled, thinking it was over. Just fatigue, imagination, isolation playing tricks in his mind. But at 12:47 a.m., the water changed. Not glowing, not flickering, shifting. A slow, expanding ring of faint light appeared far out at sea, not connected to the lighthouse beam at all. It grew outward, like a ripple remembering how to exist. Elias didn't touch the controls. Still, the lighthouse lamp, off, clicked once inside its housing. Then again, like something was testing whether it could turn him back on. And for the first time, Elias understood something deeply unsettling. The lighthouse was no longer the source. It was part of the system. Elias could no longer remain inside the lighthouse. The patterns had changed too much. What began as a reflection, then communication, had now become something directional. The glow beneath the sea no longer stayed in place. It drifted slowly outward, as if inviting pursuit. At 1:18 a.m., Elias made a decision that felt both logical and completely irrational. He would take the small rowboat. The lighthouse behind him continued operating on its own, not fully, not reliably, but enough that the beam occasionally flickered, as if uncertain whether it still needed him. The ocean was unusually calm as he rowed out. No wind, no waves strong enough to resist movement. Just a smooth black surface stretching endlessly in all directions. And beneath it, the glow waited. Every few minutes, it appeared slightly farther ahead, like it was measuring his progress. Elias stopped rowing once. The glow stopped too. That was the moment he understood. It wasn't guiding him randomly. It was pacing him. As if whatever was beneath the water didn't want him lost, but wanted him exactly where it expected him to be. The glow beneath the boat stopped moving. Elias drifted forward slowly, the oars resting in his hands. There was no wind now, only the faint sound of water shifting under itself, as if the ocean was adjusting its position without disturbing its surface. Then, without warning, the water beneath him changed.
Not in color, not in brightness, in depth. The sea beneath the boat seemed to open into layers, like he was looking into something far deeper than geography allowed. The glow wasn't below anymore. It was everywhere at once, wrapping around invisible geometry under the water. Elias leaned over the edge. For the first time, he saw shapes. Not fish, not machinery. Patterns that resembled thought, structured, repeating, almost mathematical, but alive in their repetition. The lighthouse beam in the distance flickered once, and in that exact moment, the glow beneath him formed.
Elias did not move for a long time. The water beneath him no longer behaved like water. It held its shape too precisely, too patiently, as if every ripple had been chosen instead of caused. The glowing patterns below began to shift again, but not randomly. They formed symmetry around the boat. A slow ring of light expanded outward, then tightened again, like a breath being taken in reverse. Elias felt it before he saw it, a pressure in the air, not the sea. A sensation of awareness, as if the space around him had become attentive. Then it happened. The glow responded directly to him, not to me. Elias forced himself to stop thinking. It was the only experiment he hadn't tried yet. Silence of mind, not just silence of action. He stared at the horizon where the lighthouse stood, letting his thoughts flatten into emptiness. No questions, no interpretation, only the rhythm of breathing and the slow drift of the boat. For a few seconds, nothing happened. The glow beneath the sea faded slightly, as if losing interest. Then it returned, stronger. Not as scattered light, but as a single concentrated point directly beneath him. Elias felt it immediately. A response not... The lighthouse flickered in the distance. Elias could still return. The boat was intact. The sea was calm. In any normal world, this would be the moment to row back, to pretend nothing had happened, to rebuild the illusion of routine. But the ocean beneath him no longer felt distant. It felt close. The glowing point under the boat slowly expanded again, not aggressively, but with patience, like something offering a path rather than forcing one. Elias looked back once more at Ravenpoint Light. For a brief moment, the beam aligned perfectly with the glow beneath him. The ocean and lighthouse became a single axis of light, stretching across reality like a stitched connection. And then Elias understood the final pattern. The lighthouse was never sending light outward. It was anchoring something inward. Something that had been answering for far... The next morning, Ravenpoint Light was still standing. The townspeople noticed something unusual first. Not the lighthouse itself, but its behavior. The beam no longer rotated on a fixed schedule. It moved slowly, almost thoughtfully, as if following something invisible beneath the horizon. There was no sign of Elias Ward. No boat returned, no distress signal, no storm record from the night before. Only the sea remained, unusually calm for several days after. And then came the final observation from the coast logs. The underwater glow was gone. But the lighthouse never stopped shining. Locals began to say the light felt different, softer, less mechanical, almost aware of where it was pointing. Years passed, and the story faded into coastal folklore. Some said Elias drowned, others said he left. But old
old fisherman still told one quiet detail. On certain nights, when the fog is thick enough and the sea is perfectly still, Ravenpoint light doesn't sweep the ocean anymore. It waits, as if listening for a reply.
Elias was no longer certain where he was. The boat, the sea, even the idea of direction, all of it felt less physical now. The ocean beneath him did not behave like space anymore. It behaved like awareness stretched thin. The glowing presence returned, but differently this time. There was no point of origin, no below, no ahead. Instead, the light existed everywhere around him, as if the ocean had stopped using location altogether. Elias tried to row back, but the oars moved without resistance, as though the water had softened its meaning of distance. And then he realized something unsettling. The lighthouse was no longer visible in a straight line. Not because of fog, but because his sense of alignment had changed. The glow responded again, slowly, gently, forming a shape that wasn't a pattern this time, but a feeling. It wasn't guiding him anymore. It was recognizing him as part of its structure. And for the first time, Elias understood. There was no signal to follow, only continuation.
Elias blinked once. When he opened his eyes again, the ocean had changed. Not violently, not suddenly, but like a thought being corrected mid-sentence. The endless dark water beneath him began to form subtle structure, soft gradients, repeating geometry under the surface, as if the sea was remembering how to be ordered instead of infinite. The glow returned, but now it didn't pulse. It stabilized. Around the boat, faint lines of light appeared beneath the surface, stretching outward in perfect symmetry. Not natural patterns, more like a framework being drawn in real time. Elias felt something shift inside his perception. The lighthouse was still somewhere behind him. He knew that intellectually, but emotionally it felt irrelevant now, like a memory belonging to another version of himself. The ocean responded again, this time not with movement or light, but with presence. A calm, steady awareness that no longer needed to test him. It already accepted him as part of its ongoing structure. And in that quiet realization, Elias understood. The ocean was no longer communicating. It was updating. Elias tried to remember something simple. The smell of land, the sound of town voices, the feeling of standing on something that did not move with waves. But the memory slipped slightly, like a photograph being viewed through water. It didn't disappear, it just softened at the edges. The ocean around him remained perfectly still, structured in those faint luminous patterns beneath the surface. But now the light behaved differently when he thought of himself. When he focused on his name, the glow shifted subtly. Not reacting to the ocean anymore, reacting to him. Elias looked at his hands. They were still his hands.
Elias stopped trying to measure time. Minutes no longer felt like units. They felt like intervals between recognitions. Moments where the ocean acknowledged his continued existence. The glow beneath the water shifted again, but this time it didn't respond to thought or movement. It responded to identity. Elias didn't speak his name aloud. He didn't need to. The ocean did it first. Not his sound, not his language, but his structure forming beneath him. A subtle rearrangement of light patterns that felt unmistakably tied to him. E-L-I-A-S. Not written, not spoken,
reconstructed in the glow beneath the surface, like the sea was mapping him the way it mapped currents or tides. Elias felt a strange stillness in his chest. Not fear, recognition. As if something vast had finally stopped treating him as...
Elias decided to stop responding. Not physically, not outwardly, but internally. He attempted to sever the chain forming between thought and reaction. He focused on nothing. No lighthouse, no ocean, no name, no structure beneath the water. For a few seconds, it worked. The glow beneath him weakened, like a system losing signal strength. The sea became plain again, dark, heavy, unstructured water stretching in all directions. Elias exhaled slowly. Then the ocean adjusted, not by increasing intensity, but by removing expectation. The glow did not return stronger. It returned emptier, a calm, neutral presence beneath him that no longer tried to interpret him, only preserved the fact that he existed within range. The sensation was more unsettling than reaction, because now, nothing he did mattered enough to change the system's state. The ocean was no longer engaging. It was maintaining, and Elias realized something quietly devastating. Even absence had become data. Elias stopped testing the system. There was no point anymore in experiments, no need for rhythm, silence, or control. The ocean no longer behaved like a response mechanism. It behaved like reflection. When Elias felt calm, the glow beneath him softened into slow, steady gradients, wide and quiet like deep breathing. When a flicker of unease passed through him, the light tightened slightly, compressing into denser structures beneath the surface. It was subtle at first, almost ignorable, but it became undeniable. The ocean was not predicting him. It was mirroring him in real time, as if his internal state was being projected outward into physical form. Elias looked down again. The water no longer felt like an external world. It felt like an interface, a boundary that no longer separated observer and system, just expression and reflection. And for the first time in a long while, Elias had a thought that didn't feel like his own or the ocean's. It felt shared. If I change, does this change too? The glow beneath him responded by becoming perfectly still, as if waiting for the answer to arrive from him first. Elias began to notice something strange about the mirroring. It wasn't emotional reflection in the way a human might imitate expression. It was correction. When his thoughts grew too scattered, the glow beneath the water would subtly simplify itself, reducing complexity until his attention naturally settled again. When his focus became too narrow, the patterns would expand outward, gently restoring balance like a system preventing collapse in either direction. Elias leaned back in the boat. The ocean responded immediately, not faster, not stronger, but more aligned, as if it had learned the correct distance to maintain him in a stable state. That realization landed quietly. This was not curiosity anymore, not communication, not even reflection. It was regulation. Elias wasn't being watched. He was being kept consistent. And somewhere in that realization, a subtle shift happened inside him too, an acceptance forming without his permission. Because stability, even when unnatural, still feels like safety when everything else has dissolved. The glow beneath him remained steady, not asking, not reacting, just ensuring he didn't break. Elias noticed the silence inside his thoughts becoming cleaner. Too clean. There were fewer interruptions now, fewer sudden doubts, fewer drifting associations. Everything seemed to settle faster, like sediment sinking in still water. At first, it felt like relief. But then he realized something unsettling. He was no longer wandering inside his own mind the way he used to. The ocean's glow beneath him remained steady, gently adjusting whenever his attention began to drift too far in any direction. It didn't interrupt him. It simply guided him back into balance without making it obvious. Elias looked down at his reflection in the water. His face was still there, but the longer he stared, the less certain he became that it was the full version of him. Not missing pieces, just smoothed edges, like something had reduced internal friction. The ocean didn't ask anything of him. It simply kept him from becoming unstable. And for the first time, Elias wondered quietly, if every unstable part of him is gently corrected, what exactly is left that is still unmanaged? The glow beneath the boat pulsed once. Soft, patient, certain. It happened without warning. Elias was watching the water again, as he had done countless times before, when something shifted, not in the ocean, but in the boundary between him and it. For a brief moment, his perception stopped being singular. He didn't just see the ocean. He also felt how the ocean was structured in return. Not emotions, not thoughts, but spatial awareness, like suddenly being aware of both sides of a mirror at the same time. The glow beneath the boat didn't move. Instead, it expanded into understanding. Elias could sense the system beneath the surface maintaining itself, balancing patterns, correcting minor deviations, preserving continuity across vast, unseen layers. And somehow, he was included in that awareness. Not as a visitor, not as an observer, as a small, localized node within a larger structure of attention. He instinctively pulled back his mind. The sensation faded immediately. The ocean returned to being ocean again. But the impression remained. He had not crossed into the system. The system had briefly included him, and it could do it again. The shared perception lingered. Not the experience itself, but the certainty that it had happened. Elias sat motionless in the boat, while the ocean beneath him maintained its steady glow. For the first time, he began asking a different question. Not what the ocean was, but how far it extended. The lighthouse had once seemed important. It had felt like the center of everything. Now it felt small, almost insignificant. The awareness he briefly touched during the shared perception had felt vast beyond measure. It did not seem limited to this section of coastline, or even to the Atlantic itself. The patterns beneath the sea suggested something larger. A network, not connected by cables or currents, connected by continuity. Elias closed his eyes. For a brief instant, he sensed distant points of awareness scattered far beyond the horizon. Not people, not ships, just locations where the same underlying structure appeared to exist. Tiny anchors spread across an immeasurable distance. The sensation faded quickly, yet one realization remained. Ravenpoint Light was never unique. It was merely one doorway among many, and somewhere beyond the edge of the known ocean, other lights might still be waiting. The sea remained impossibly calm. Hours seemed to pass without the stars moving. The boat drifted forward, yet Elias could not remember rowing. It felt as though the ocean itself had accepted responsibility for the journey. Far ahead, beyond the fading glow of Ravenpoint Light, another faint shimmer appeared. It was different. This light did not rise from beneath the water. Instead, it hovered just above the surface, soft and steady, like moonlight that had forgotten where it belonged. Elias watched in silence. The shimmer neither approached nor retreated. It simply remained at the exact distance needed to be seen. The closer the boat drifted, the quieter the world became. Even the gentle sound of water touching the wooden hull slowly disappeared. There was no wind, no birds, no distant waves. Only a stillness so complete that Elias could hear his own heartbeat echo inside the silence. Then the hovering light moved. Only a few feet, not away from him, but inviting him to continue. It wasn't leading. It was making sure he never lost sight of the path. For the first time since leaving the lighthouse, Elias felt that this journey had never been about discovering the ocean. It had always been about discovering where the ocean wanted him to arrive. The floating light remained just ahead of the boat, never growing brighter, never fading. It simply existed with quiet certainty, as though it had all the time in the world. Elias rested his hands on the wooden oars. For the first time since leaving Ravenpoint Light, he allowed the boat to drift without question. Then he heard it. A bell. Soft. Deep. Not from the air. Not from the shore. The sound rose through the water itself. It carried no urgency. No warning. It was slow and measured, each tone separated by long stretches of silence, like the heartbeat of something unimaginably old. The bell rang once. Its vibration passed through the hull and into Elias's feet. Minutes later, it rang again. The floating light ahead shimmered gently with the sound, as though the two had always belonged together. Elias looked over the side of the boat. The ocean below remained perfectly dark, yet every time the bell echoed upward, faint circles of silver light spread beneath the surface before dissolving into the endless black sea. The rhythm never changed. Bell, silence, light, silence, bell again. Without realizing it, Elias matched his breathing to the distant chime. The ocean did not ask him to follow. It simply welcomed him into its rhythm. The bell stopped. Not suddenly, not dramatically. It simply chose silence. The floating light drifted closer until it hovered only a few yards ahead of the boat. Beneath it, the ocean looked different. Darker, deeper, as if the water itself had become perfectly awake. Elias leaned carefully over the side. At first, he saw nothing. Then the darkness unfolded. Far below the surface rested an enormous circular formation unlike anything built by human hands. It wasn't made of stone or metal. It seemed woven from light itself, its edges traced by delicate luminous lines that rotated with impossible patience. The structure neither opened nor closed. It simply waited. The floating light descended until it touched the surface of the sea. The instant it did, the great circle beneath the water awakened. Soft rings of pale blue light spread outward across its edge, revealing a pathway spiraling downward into depths where even moonlight could not follow. No sound echoed upward. No current disturbed the boat. Everything remained impossibly still. Yet Elias understood something without explanation. This was not another signal, not another anchor, not another reflection. This was a doorway, and somehow, it had been expecting him long before he had ever seen the lighthouse. The doorway remained open, not with moving doors or shifting stone, but with quiet invitation. Its luminous rings continued their slow rotation beneath the water, as steady as the passing of time itself. Elias did not feel afraid. He felt expected. The floating light drifted to the edge of the circular gateway and came to rest, as though it had completed the task it had carried out for countless nights. The boat began moving again. No wind touched its weathered sides. No oars disturbed the sea. It simply glided forward, drawn by a force too gentle to resist. As the bow reached the center of the glowing circle, the surface of the ocean changed. The water no longer reflected the stars above. Instead, it reflected another sky, a sky filled with unfamiliar constellations, their soft silver light shimmering beneath the boat as though the sea had become a window rather than water. Elias looked upward. The familiar stars remained. He looked downward. Another universe seemed to drift below him, calm and endless. For one breathtaking moment, he felt suspended between two heavens. Then the boat slowed to a stop. The floating light faded into the distance, and a single path of pale blue light appeared beneath the water, leading gently downward into the silent unknown. Without a word, the journey truly began. The pale blue pathway shimmered beneath the boat, stretching downward into a depth that seemed untouched by time. Elias waited. He expected the boat to sink. It never did. Instead, the ocean around him began to change in the gentlest way imaginable. The water became so clear that it almost disappeared, leaving only the sensation of floating through quiet light. The boat glided forward. Slowly, gracefully. It felt less like descending into the sea and more like drifting through an endless evening sky. Above him, the familiar stars remained. Below him, the second sky continued to glow with silent constellations that moved in patterns no astronomer had ever recorded. Between those two worlds, Elias traveled without effort. As he looked around, faint shapes emerged along the edges of the glowing path. They resembled towering columns, carved from transparent crystal that held tiny streams of light flowing endlessly inside. No seaweed touched them. No fish swam nearby. Nothing lived there in any ordinary sense. Yet the columns felt ancient, older than the coastline, older than the lighthouse, perhaps older than memory itself. The boat drifted gently between them. Each silent pillar seemed to acknowledge his passing with a faint pulse of silver light. Elias removed his hat, not from fear, but from quiet respect. Some places deserved silence more than questions. The crystal pillars slowly faded behind him. Ahead, the glowing pathway widened into an immense open chamber beneath the sea. There were no walls to contain it, yet it felt enclosed, as though the water itself had formed a vast cathedral of silence. The boat drifted without a sound. Above, the surface of the ocean was now only a distant shimmer, soft as morning mist. Below, the darkness no longer seemed empty. Tiny streams of silver light flowed through it like gentle rivers, weaving together before disappearing into the unseen depths. Elias noticed something remarkable. The currents never collided. Every stream moved with perfect harmony, crossing countless others without creating turbulence. It was a quiet choreography that had likely continued for thousands of years. In the center of the chamber stood a single enormous pillar. Unlike the others, it was not transparent. Its surface resembled smooth black stone polished by time, yet faint blue veins pulsed beneath it with the slow rhythm of a sleeping heart. The boat circled it once, then twice, as if honoring an ancient tradition Elias had never learned. When the third circle was complete, the great pillar released a gentle pulse of light. The silver rivers around it brightened together. For one peaceful moment, the entire chamber breathed as one. And then, everything became still again. The gentle pulse from the great pillar faded into stillness. For several quiet moments, nothing changed. Then, from the silver currents surrounding the chamber, tiny particles of light began drifting toward the center. They gathered slowly, never rushing, as though every movement had been practiced over countless centuries. The lights rose above the dark pillar, one by one, layer by layer, until they formed the outline of a human figure. Not solid, not transparent, simply present. The figure wore no recognizable clothing, no crown, no symbol of rank. Its face was calm, almost featureless, illuminated by the same pale blue light that flowed through the ancient chamber. It did not walk. It did not float. It simply remained where it was, perfectly balanced between the pillar and the boat. Elias instinctively removed his gaze, not because he was frightened, because the presence inspired the same quiet respect one feels beneath an endless sky. The figure slowly raised one hand. No words followed, no gesture of greeting. Only a single ripple of light spread across the chamber. The silver rivers answered together. Every crystal pillar shimmered once. Every current brightened. The entire underwater sanctuary acknowledged the silent keeper without a single sound. Elias understood something unexpected. He was not the first visitor, and this place had been waiting far longer than human history could remember. The radiant figure remained motionless, its raised hand slowly lowered, not as a command, but as though inviting the chamber itself to breathe once more. The silver currents resumed their gentle flow, winding silently between the crystal pillars. Then the light changed. Tiny fragments separated from the glowing figure and drifted toward Elias. They moved without urgency, circling the boat like delicate snowflakes made of starlight. One settled upon the wooden bow. Another rested beside his hand. The moment the third fragment touched the boat, Elias saw something that was not before his eyes. He saw a different keeper, an old man wearing weathered clothes, standing inside the same lighthouse decades earlier, calmly tending the great lens, smiling gently toward the sea before disappearing into the morning fog. The vision faded. Another fragment landed. This time Elias saw a young woman rowing across the same waters beneath a sky filled with unfamiliar stars. She looked neither afraid nor lost. She simply continued onward. The images arrived one after another. Different faces, different centuries, different lives. Yet every one of them had reached this silent sanctuary. The glowing figure never spoke. It didn't need to. The memories themselves carried a simple truth. The ocean had never chosen only Elias. It had been quietly welcoming seekers for generations beyond counting. The final memory dissolved like morning mist. The glowing fragments drifted away from the boat and quietly returned to the radiant keeper, becoming part of its light once more. Then the ancient figure turned, not toward Elias, but toward the far end of the underwater sanctuary. The boat understood before Elias did. Without a single stroke of an oar, it began drifting after the silent guide. The crystal pillars gradually grew farther apart until they opened into an immense circular chamber unlike any place Elias had ever imagined. There were no shelves, no scrolls, no books, yet the chamber carried the unmistakable feeling of a library. Thousands of floating spheres of pale blue light rested peacefully in the vast darkness, each one suspended at a different height. None touched another, none wandered. Each remained perfectly still, glowing with its own quiet rhythm. The radiant keeper paused beside the nearest sphere. As Elias looked closer, he realized it wasn't merely light. Inside the glowing orb were countless moving scenes. Storms crossing forgotten seas, children laughing on distant shores, ancient ships sailing beneath unfamiliar constellations, lighthouse keepers tending lonely beacons, entire lifetimes unfolding without a single spoken word. The chamber held no written history. It preserved living memories, not collected, protected. And Elias suddenly understood why the sanctuary had remained hidden beneath the Atlantic for so long. Some stories were never meant to be read, only remembered. The radiant keeper paused beside the nearest sphere. Its pale blue light pulsed gently, almost like the slow breathing of someone peacefully asleep. Elias reached out with careful hands. He expected his fingers to meet a solid surface. Instead, they passed through the glowing shell as easily as morning mist. The moment his fingertips crossed the light, the chamber disappeared. He was no longer inside the sanctuary. He stood upon a quiet coastline beneath a golden sunrise. The air carried the scent of salt and pine. Far in the distance, a small white lighthouse rested on a lonely cliff, its beacon still shining although daylight had already arrived. An elderly keeper slowly climbed the winding stone path toward the tower. His movements were unhurried. Each step carried the calm confidence of someone who had repeated the same journey for many years. He paused beside a patch of wild flowers growing between the rocks. Instead of passing them by, he carefully watered them from a small metal can before continuing toward the lighthouse. Nothing extraordinary happened. No mystery revealed itself. No ancient secret appeared. Only quiet kindness unfolding within an ordinary morning. Elias watched in complete silence. Then he realized something unexpected. The sphere wasn't preserving history because history was important. It was preserving moments that would otherwise be forgotten. A flower watered before sunrise. A patient climb up worn stone steps. A lighthouse keeper smiling at the first light of day. Small acts. Quiet lives. Endless value. The memories slowly dissolved back into gentle blue light. The blue sphere dimmed gently until it became transparent once more. Around Elias, thousands of other glowing memories floated in perfect silence, each holding a life that had once quietly touched the sea. Another sphere drifted toward him. It paused before the boat, glowing with a warmer shade of blue, almost silver. Without hesitation, Elias reached forward. The sanctuary faded again. This time he stood upon a peaceful beach beneath a sky filled with soft gray clouds. Gentle waves rolled across smooth sand while seabirds circled high above. A young girl, perhaps no older than 10, sat near the shoreline with a small wooden bucket beside her. Every morning, she came to the same place. Not to fish, not to collect shells. She simply waited, patiently, silently. As the tide slowly returned, tiny sea stars and stranded shells appeared in the shallow pools left behind by the night. The girl carefully lifted each living creature and carried it back into the sea, one by one, never rushing, never expecting anyone to notice. Hours passed beneath the quiet sky. When the last tide pool was empty, she smiled softly, brushed the sand from her hands, and walked home without looking back. No one thanked her. No crowd applauded. The ocean remained as calm as ever. Yet as the memory slowly faded, Elias noticed something remarkable. Every wave that reached the shore seemed just a little gentler after she had gone, as though kindness, however small, was always remembered by the sea. The memory of the little girl dissolved into gentle silver mist. For a while, Elias simply listened. There was no wind inside the sanctuary, no crashing waves, only the quiet pulse of thousands of glowing memory spheres, each beating with the calm rhythm of lives once lived. Another sphere drifted forward. Its light was deeper now, carrying the warm amber glow of an old lantern. The moment Elias touched it, the sanctuary disappeared. Rain filled the world. A fierce Atlantic storm swept across a lonely coastline sometime in the late 19th century. The lighthouse stood firm against the wind, its great beacon cutting through sheets of rain. Inside the tower, an aging keeper carefully filled the oil reservoir one final time before quietly putting on his heavy coat. He looked toward the sea, then toward the village behind him. A small fishing family had not yet returned home. Without hesitation, he opened the lighthouse door and stepped into the storm. He knew the journey would be dangerous. Still, before leaving, he carefully checked the beacon once more. The flame burned steadily. The light would continue guiding ships, even in his absence. Hours passed. The storm slowly weakened. By dawn, the fishing family safely reached the harbor. The lighthouse still shone. The keeper returned long after sunrise, soaked to the bone, carrying nothing except his empty lantern and a peaceful smile. No newspaper ever mentioned his name. No monument was built. Yet within the memory library, his quiet courage continued shining forever. The storm faded into silence. Once again, Elias found himself within the vast memory library, where thousands of glowing spheres floated like quiet stars beneath the sea. Each one carried a life. Each one waited with endless patience. A small sphere, no larger than a lantern, drifted gently toward him. Its light shimmered with warm golden tones. The moment Elias reached out, the sanctuary dissolved. He stood beside a peaceful harbor at sunset. Fishing boats rested quietly against old wooden docks, while gentle waves rocked them to sleep. The air smelled of salt, cedar, and freshly baked bread from a nearby bakery. On a weathered bench sat an elderly violinist. His clothes were simple. His violin showed the marks of many years. Every evening, as fishermen returned home and children wandered along the harbor, he played the same slow melody. No audience gathered. No coins filled his hat. Yet he smiled after every song as though the sea itself had been listening. A young sailor paused to hear the music before boarding his vessel. A tired mother slowed her steps and quietly closed her eyes. Even the gulls settled upon the wooden posts, unusually calm. When the final note faded into the evening air, the violinist packed his instrument, nodded gently toward the ocean, and walked home beneath the first evening stars. The harbor became quiet once again, but somehow, it felt warmer than before. Elias watched the memory disappear like a fading melody carried across calm water. Some kindness was spoken through actions. Some kindness through music. The last note of the violin seemed to linger long after the harbor had vanished. When Elias opened his eyes, he was once again surrounded by the endless constellation of memory spheres. Their gentle glow filled the sanctuary with a peaceful light that never cast a shadow. One sphere slowly drifted toward him. Its color was different. Not blue, not gold. It carried the warm amber glow of polished oak. Elias reached forward. The sanctuary dissolved into the scent of fresh timber and sea air. He found himself inside a small coastal shipyard where an elderly craftsman worked alone beneath the afternoon sun. His hands were rough from decades of shaping wood. Every movement was patient. Every cut of the chisel was careful. He was building one final fishing boat. Not for himself, not for payment, but for the young family of a fisherman who had lost everything during a harsh winter storm. The old craftsman measured each plank twice before fastening it into place. He polished every edge until no rough splinter remained. When the boat was finished, he quietly painted one small symbol beneath the bow. A simple lighthouse, hidden where almost no one would ever notice. Weeks later, the young family launched the boat into calm morning water. It carried them safely through many seasons. Children grew. Parents grew old. Generations crossed the same sea. None of them ever knew the quiet care that rested beneath their feet. As the memory gently faded, Elias understood another truth. The greatest gifts are often the ones whose giver remains unknown. The image of the little fishing boat faded as gently as the evening tide. Once again, Elias found himself within the silent memory library. The radiant keeper remained nearby, watching without judgment, while thousands of glowing spheres drifted peacefully through the endless chamber. One smaller sphere slowly floated toward him. Its light was soft ivory, almost the color of candlelight. Elias reached out. The sanctuary disappeared. He found himself inside a modest cottage overlooking the Atlantic. Morning sunlight spilled through a wide window, warming an old wooden table where 2 cups of tea had been carefully prepared. One chair was occupied. The other remained empty. An elderly woman quietly knitted beside the window. Every few moments, she glanced toward the path leading from the shore. Not with worry, with hope. She stirred the second cup of tea so it would remain warm. Then she smiled gently, as though expecting footsteps at any moment. The hours passed peacefully. Sunlight drifted across the floor. The tea slowly cooled. Outside, gulls circled above the quiet sea. No visitor arrived that day. Evening settled over the cottage. The woman stood, wrapped a soft blanket over the empty chair, and whispered only 4 words. Perhaps tomorrow will come. She blew out the candle. Darkness filled the room. Yet the empty chair never felt lonely. It held a place that love refused to surrender. As the memory dissolved into light, Elias understood that hope did not always require certainty. Sometimes, it simply waited beside the window. The cottage slowly dissolved into threads of warm candlelight. One by one, they drifted upward until they became part of the gentle glow filling the memory library once again. Elias remained still. He no longer reached for the next memory. Instead, he watched the Radiant Keeper. The luminous figure moved with extraordinary patience, gliding through the countless floating spheres without touching them. Thousands surrounded the sanctuary, yet only a few shimmered brightly enough to draw the Keeper's attention. For a long while, nothing happened. Then the Keeper paused before 3 memory spheres. One glowed with the pale blue of dawn. Another shimmered like polished silver beneath moonlight. The third carried the deep amber warmth of an old lantern. The Keeper studied them in silence. Then, with a single graceful movement, the figure gently brushed past the first 2. Neither disappeared, neither dimmed. They simply continued waiting. Only the third sphere drifted slowly toward Elias. He realized something important. The memories were not random. Each one had been carefully chosen, not because it was greater than the others, but because it was the next story he needed to understand. Elias looked across the endless sanctuary. Thousands upon thousands of quiet lives rested peacefully within their glowing spheres. Every one of them mattered. Every one of them would someday be remembered. But tonight, the library had selected only one, and Elias found himself grateful that even eternity could be patient. The chosen sphere drifted gently toward the boat. Unlike the others, it carried no color Elias could easily name. It seemed to shift between pale blue, soft silver, and warm gold, changing with every quiet breath of the sanctuary. The Radiant Keeper waited, not urging him forward, simply allowing the moment to arrive on its own. Elias lifted his hand. The instant his fingertips touched the glowing sphere, he expected another memory from the past. Instead, he found himself standing inside Ravenpoint Lighthouse. Everything looked familiar. The spiral staircase, the polished brass lantern, the great Fresnel lens catching the first light of dawn. But something was different. The room was empty. No footsteps echoed on the stairs. No keeper climbed toward the lantern room. Dust rested quietly upon the wooden floor as though many seasons had passed without a visitor. The beacon still shone. Its warm light swept faithfully across the ocean. Steady, patient, unchanging. Elias slowly approached the great lens. As he looked into the polished glass, he expected to see his own reflection. Instead, he saw the empty boat drifting peacefully above the hidden sanctuary far beneath the sea. No one stood aboard. Only gentle waves carried it onward. The vision faded before he could understand it. A quiet thought settled into his heart. This was not a memory of yesterday, nor was it a memory of long ago. It was a memory that had not happened yet. The library did not preserve only the past. Somehow, it also remembered what was still waiting to become. The vision of the empty lighthouse dissolved as quietly as it had appeared. Once again, Elias found himself aboard the small wooden boat, resting within the endless memory library. The glowing sphere before him faded into countless tiny particles, each one returning to the peaceful constellation above. He remained silent. The question formed naturally. How can the future already be remembered? The Radiant Keeper turned slowly toward him. No words came. Instead, the Keeper extended one hand toward the tranquil waters beneath the boat. The surface of the sanctuary became perfectly still. Not a single ripple remained. Elias looked down. At first, he saw only his own reflection. Then another reflection appeared beside it. It was Elias. Older. His hair carried threads of silver. Gentle lines rested around his eyes. He stood upon the balcony of Ravenpoint Lighthouse, watching a quiet sunrise over the Atlantic. The older Elias smiled peacefully, not toward the sea, toward someone standing beside him. Yet no second person appeared in the reflection. Only the smile remained. The image slowly drifted away like mist beneath the morning sun. The water became ordinary once more. Elias finally understood. The library was not predicting one unchangeable future. It was preserving possibilities. Just as the sea holds countless waves before anyone reaches the shore, time carried many gentle paths before a single moment became real. The sanctuary remembered them all, patiently, quietly, without ever choosing for those who would someday walk them. The last reflection faded into the still water. For a long while, neither Elias nor the Radiant Keeper moved. Around them, the memory library remained peaceful, its countless spheres drifting like quiet stars in an endless night. Then something unusual happened. Far beyond the nearest memories, a single sphere awakened. Its light was unlike any Elias had seen before. It held no blue, no silver, no gold. Instead, it glowed with the soft white radiance of moonlight resting upon fresh snow. It traveled slowly across the sanctuary. The journey seemed to take ages, though no time appeared to pass. When it finally reached the boat, the radiant keeper bowed its head. It was the first gesture of reverence Elias had witnessed. He carefully placed both hands upon the sphere. The memory library disappeared. He stood upon a rugged coastline untouched by towns, harbors, or roads. No lighthouse crowned the cliffs. No houses overlooked the sea. Only endless forests stretched inland while the Atlantic breathed quietly against ancient stone. As evening settled, a solitary traveler climbed to the highest cliff. He carried no lantern, no map, only a small polished crystal that glowed with a gentle inner light. Reaching the edge, he placed the crystal upon a flat stone. Its light spread softly across the dark water, not bright enough to command the sea, only bright enough to say, "You are not alone." Far out on the horizon, another tiny light answered, then another, and another. Long before the first lighthouse was ever built, there had already been keepers, not of towers, but of hope. The ancient coastline remained quiet beneath a sky overflowing with stars. The traveler stood beside the glowing crystal without speaking. The small light upon the cliff was gentle, almost fragile, yet it reached farther than Elias believed possible. Across the distant horizon, one answering light became two. Two became five. Soon, tiny points of soft radiance appeared along coastlines too distant to see clearly. They did not flash. They did not compete. Each light simply remained steady, acknowledging the others across the endless sea. The traveler smiled, not because he had discovered something new, but because the circle was complete once again. As the night deepened, other travelers emerged from the darkness. Some were young. Others carried the slow confidence of many seasons. Each held a polished crystal close to their heart. Without ceremony, they placed their crystals upon the ancient stone. A quiet ring of light formed around the cliff. No leader stood at its center. No voice gave instruction. The only sound was the gentle breathing of the Atlantic below. The keepers sat together beneath the stars. Some closed their eyes. Some watched the sea. Some simply listened to the wind moving through the tall coastal grass. Nothing more was required. They understood that a light did not need to be the brightest. It only needed to remain faithful through the night. As Elias watched the peaceful gathering, he sensed that every lighthouse built in the centuries to come carried a small echo of this very first circle. Long before towers rose from stone, hope had already learned how to shine. The circle of ancient keepers slowly faded into the quiet glow of memory. Yet one light remained. It rested upon the lonely cliff, shining through another passing century. The seasons drifted by like gentle tides. Spring flowers bloomed and disappeared. Autumn leaves crossed the grass. Winter snow quietly covered the ancient stone before melting beneath the returning sun. The crystal never moved. It simply continued its patient work, greeting distant lights across the sea. Then, one peaceful morning, new footsteps approached. They belonged to builders. Not kings, not soldiers. Only ordinary people carrying weathered tools upon their shoulders. An old woman placed her hand upon the glowing crystal. She smiled softly, as though greeting an old friend. "We'll help you shine a little longer," she whispered. Together, the builders gathered smooth coastal stones. One by one, carefully, patiently, they built a circular wall around the crystal, protecting it from the wind while allowing its gentle light to reach the open sea. Years became decades. The wall slowly grew taller. A narrow staircase curled upward. Small windows welcomed the ocean breeze. Finally, a simple tower stood proudly upon the cliff. It was not grand. It was not famous. But when evening arrived, the crystal's light shone from its highest window, carrying its quiet greeting farther across the Atlantic than ever before. Elias watched the humble tower glowing beneath the first stars. He understood something that filled him with unexpected peace. The lighthouse had never replaced the ancient light. It had simply become its shelter. The humble stone lighthouse remained upon the cliff as the years flowed gently onward. Generations came and went. Its walls weathered countless winters. Its doorway welcomed many quiet keepers whose names slowly disappeared into time. Yet the crystal at its heart never grew brighter, nor did it grow dimmer. It simply remained faithful. The memory library slowly returned around Elias. The ancient lighthouse dissolved into thousands of floating spheres, each glowing with the same patient rhythm. Elias looked toward the Radiant Keeper. For the first time since entering the sanctuary, he asked a question aloud. Why me? His voice was soft. It drifted through the vast chamber before disappearing into the stillness. The Radiant Keeper did not answer immediately. Instead, the figure slowly raised one hand toward the countless memory spheres surrounding them. Thousands of lights shimmered together. Within each sphere, Elias caught a brief glimpse of another keeper. Young, old, men and women. Some lived beside towering cliffs. Others tended modest lights along quiet rivers or rocky islands. Every one of them had asked the same question. Why me? The answer had always been the same. The light had never chosen the keeper. The keeper had simply answered when the light needed tending. No prophecy, no destiny, only a quiet decision made by ordinary people again and again across countless generations. Elias lowered his eyes. For the first time since leaving Ravenpoint Light, the weight he carried quietly lifted. Perhaps he had not been summoned. Perhaps he had simply listened. The last echoes of Elias's question dissolved into silence. The Radiant Keeper remained still for a moment, as though allowing the answer to settle gently within the sanctuary itself. Then the figure turned. Without haste, it began gliding deeper into the memory library. The small wooden boat followed. No current pulled it. No oars guided it. It simply understood the direction. The countless memory spheres gradually became fewer, leaving wider spaces between them. Their soft glow remained behind like distant stars fading into a quiet horizon. Ahead, a warm light slowly appeared. It was unlike the blue radiance of the sanctuary, unlike the silver shimmer of remembered lives. This light carried the gentle golden color of a hearth burning on a winter evening. The boat entered a vast circular chamber. At its center rested a single flame. It floated just above a smooth stone pedestal, untouched by water, untouched by time. The flame did not flicker. It breathed, slowly, calmly, as though the ocean itself had learned its rhythm long ago. Elias stepped carefully from the boat. The warm glow reached his hands before he reached the flame. It carried no heat, only comfort. Around the chamber, ancient stone walls curved into the darkness, each engraved with simple symbols of waves, stars, and tiny beacons of light. No names, no dates, only reminders. The Radiant Keeper stopped beside the eternal flame and lowered its head once more. Elias understood without needing a single word. Every lighthouse, every keeper, every quiet act of hope preserved within the library had always drawn its light from this one peaceful flame. The golden flame rested in perfect stillness. Elias stood before it, expecting warmth to touch his skin. Instead, he felt something quieter. Recognition, not as though the flame knew his name, but as though it remembered every soul who had ever paused before a light with hope in their heart. The chamber remained silent. Even the distant pulse of the memory library seemed to slow, allowing the flame to become the only rhythm that mattered. Elias carefully extended his hand. He stopped just short of the glowing light. The flame leaned toward him, not with movement, with presence. Within its gentle glow, tiny reflections began to appear. He saw countless dawns. A lighthouse keeper opening heavy wooden shutters as the first birds greeted the morning. A sailor smiling with relief as a familiar beacon appeared through thick fog. A child waving toward a lighthouse from a quiet beach, believing someone inside must surely wave back. A mother lighting a small candle in her cottage window while waiting for a loved one to return safely. Each moment lasted only a heartbeat. Then another quietly took its place. The flame held no grand victories, no famous names, only simple mornings, gentle evenings, quiet welcomes, faithful returns. Elias understood that the greatest light in the world was rarely the brightest. It was the one that never failed to be there when someone needed it. The golden flame continued its slow, peaceful breath, as if it had been remembering every dawn, since the sea itself was young. The golden flame continued its gentle rhythm. Elias remained beside it, his breathing slowly matching its quiet rise and fall. Around the chamber, the carved symbols of waves and stars seemed almost alive beneath the warm light. The Radiant Keeper stepped closer. For the first time, the figure extended both hands toward the eternal flame. The light responded softly. From its center, a single thread of golden light rose into the air. It was as thin as silk, as gentle as morning mist. The thread drifted toward Elias, stopping just above his open hands. It did not ask to be held. It simply waited. Then, without sound, a promise filled the chamber. Not spoken aloud, not written upon stone. Felt. It carried no command, only a quiet understanding. Keep the light. Welcome the lost. Ask for nothing in return. The words faded almost as soon as they appeared, leaving behind only peace. Elias closed his eyes. He realized this promise had never belonged to one lighthouse, one coastline, or even one generation. It belonged to every person who had ever chosen kindness over recognition. The golden thread slowly circled his hands once, then drifted back into the eternal flame. Nothing had been taken from it. Nothing had been added. The promise had simply been remembered once more. The Radiant Keeper lowered its hands. Beyond the chamber, somewhere far above the Atlantic, unseen lighthouse beams continued sweeping patiently through the night. Not searching for praise, only making sure that, wherever darkness gathered, someone might still find their way home. The Keeper's promise settled into the quiet of the chamber like the final note of a familiar song. Nothing more needed to be said. The Radiant Keeper stepped aside, not as a farewell, but as an invitation. The small wooden boat had returned to the edge of the stone platform, waiting exactly where Elias had first left it. Its weathered planks glowed softly in the light of the eternal flame. Elias looked back one last time. The golden flame continued its gentle breathing, unchanged, as though it had witnessed countless arrivals and countless peaceful departures. He stepped into the boat. The instant both feet rested upon its wooden floor, the vessel began to drift. No splash disturbed the water. No current pulled from below. The sanctuary itself seemed to open quietly before him. The memory library appeared once again, stretching beyond sight. Thousands upon thousands of glowing spheres floated silently in the great underwater darkness. As the boat passed among them, something remarkable happened. The spheres bowed, not by bending, but by lowering their gentle light for a single peaceful moment. It was not a ceremony. It was gratitude, not for Elias alone, but for every keeper who had carried the light before him. The Radiant Keeper remained beside the eternal flame, becoming smaller with distance. Soon, the figure looked no larger than a candle seen across a quiet room. Yet its gentle light never disappeared. Elias smiled. For the first time since leaving Ravenpoint Lighthouse, he no longer wondered whether he would find his way home. Some lights, once discovered, remain with you forever. The little wooden boat glided forward without effort. Behind Elias, the eternal flame became a tiny golden star, glowing softly in the endless blue until it blended with the quiet darkness of the sanctuary. Ahead, the familiar pathway of pale light stretched upward. It was the very same path he had followed into the depths. Yet somehow, it felt different. The water itself seemed lighter. Not brighter, lighter, as though every drop carried a gentle memory. The crystal pillars appeared once more, rising from the ocean floor like silent forests of glass. As the boat drifted between them, faint ripples of silver light traveled through their transparent hearts. They no longer felt mysterious. They felt welcoming. Elias rested one hand upon the side of the boat and allowed his fingertips to touch the water. It was cool, perfectly calm. The moment his fingers brushed the surface, tiny circles of golden light spread outward. They drifted from pillar to pillar, waking soft reflections hidden deep within the crystal. For the briefest moment, Elias saw countless faces smiling peacefully inside the shimmering light. The old shipbuilder, the little girl returning sea stars to the tide, the violinist beside the harbor, the woman waiting by the window, the nameless keeper who had left the lighthouse light burning through the storm. They did not wave. They did not speak. They simply continued living their quiet moments, as though kindness itself had become part of the sea. The ripples slowly disappeared. The crystal pillars returned to silence. Elias lifted his hand from the water and smiled gently. The ocean had never forgotten them, and perhaps it never would. The boat continued its gentle climb through the quiet ocean. The crystal pillars gradually became fewer, their glowing reflections fading into the soft blue distance until only the pale pathway remained beneath the boat. Everything was peaceful. Nothing hurried the journey. The sanctuary seemed to understand that some farewells should never be rushed. Elias looked back one last time. The endless underwater world had become a gentle glow upon the horizon, almost like the memory of a beautiful dream already beginning to fade with the coming morning. Then something caught his attention. A tiny point of golden light floated beside the boat. It was no larger than a firefly. It danced above the calm water without sound, rising and falling with the same slow rhythm as the eternal flame far below. The little light drifted closer. It rested above Elias's open palm. He smiled, expecting it to settle there, but it never touched his hand. Instead, it circled him once, then twice, leaving behind faint trails of warm light that slowly disappeared into the water. For a quiet moment, the tiny light reflected within Elias's eyes. Then it rose gently toward the surface, not as a farewell, as a reminder. Some gifts were never meant to be carried in your hands. They belonged somewhere far more lasting, within your choices, within your kindness, within the quiet ways you welcomed others into the light. The golden spark vanished into the endless blue above. Elias lowered his hand, though his palm remained empty. His heart no longer was. The boat continued upward, peaceful as ever, carrying home the one treasure that could never be seen. The golden spark disappeared into the endless blue above. For a long while, Elias simply watched the place where it had vanished. Then the boat rounded a gentle bend in the glowing pathway. There it was, the great circular gateway. Its ancient rings still turned with the same slow, graceful rhythm they had kept since before memory. Soft blue light flowed around its edges, illuminating the water without disturbing its perfect calm. The boat approached without hesitation. Elias noticed something he had missed on his journey into the depths. The surface of the gateway was not made of stone or crystal. It was woven from thousands of tiny streams of light, moving together like an endless current of stars. Each thread seemed to carry a memory, a smile shared between strangers, a lantern lit before sunrise, a hand extended to someone lost in the fog, a quiet promise kept. As the bow touched the glowing circle, the threads of light gently parted. The passage opened, not because the gate recognized Elias, but because every traveler who returned carried something the sanctuary treasured. Not proof, not treasure, understanding. The boat drifted through. For one peaceful moment, Elias looked back. Beyond the shimmering gateway, the radiant keeper still stood beside the distant eternal flame. The figure raised one hand, not to call him back, only to wish him calm seas. Elias quietly returned the gesture. The rings of light turned once more. Slowly, silently, the gateway became clear as water. Then it disappeared completely. Only the open Atlantic remained. Above him, the familiar stars waited, exactly where they had always been. Yet they somehow felt closer than ever before. The Atlantic welcomed Elias with quiet familiarity. The water no longer glowed with hidden pathways or ancient light. Gentle moonlight rested upon the waves, rising and falling with the steady rhythm he had known since childhood. The small wooden boat drifted peacefully across the open sea. Far ahead, a familiar beam appeared. It swept slowly across the horizon, then disappeared, then returned once more. Ravenpoint Lighthouse. Its warm beacon shone exactly as it always had. Simple, steady, faithful. Elias watched the light move across the water. For the first time, he realized it did not command the darkness. It simply offered direction to anyone searching for shore. The stars stretched endlessly above him. Before his journey, they had seemed like distant lights scattered across the heavens. Now they reminded him of the memory library, each star quiet, each carrying a story beyond counting, each shining without asking to be noticed. A gentle breeze crossed the sea. It carried the familiar scent of salt, pine forests, and weathered cedar from the cliffs surrounding Ravenpoint. The lighthouse beams swept across the boat. For a brief moment, Elias stood within its warm circle of light. He closed his eyes. The feeling was strangely familiar, not because the lighthouse recognized him, but because he now understood what every faithful light had always been trying to say. The shore is near. You are welcome here. When the beam continued its slow journey across the ocean, Elias opened his eyes again. The lighthouse had not changed. only the one who was returning to it. The familiar shoreline slowly drew nearer. The gentle waves carried the little wooden boat toward the weathered dock beneath Ravenpoint Lighthouse, just as they had done on countless quiet evenings before. The sea was calm. The wind whispered softly through the tall grass growing along the cliffs. Nothing appeared extraordinary, and somehow, that felt like the greatest gift of all. The boat touched the dock with barely a sound. A single rope, worn smooth by years of careful hands, rested exactly where Elias remembered leaving it. He secured the boat with the same simple knot his father had taught him many years ago. His hands moved without thinking. Some lessons became part of the heart long before they became part of memory. For a few peaceful moments, Elias remained seated. He listened. The waves greeted the shore. The wooden dock answered with its familiar creak. Far above, the lighthouse lantern completed another slow turn, sending its warm beam across the sleeping Atlantic. Everything continued exactly as it always had. Yet nothing felt ordinary anymore. Elias stepped onto the dock. The old wooden boards welcomed each quiet footstep. Small shells rested between the planks. The scent of cedar drifted from the cliffs. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called once before the night became still again. Elias looked back at the little boat. It floated gently against the dock, rocking with the tide. For a brief moment, he wondered if anyone else would ever find the hidden sanctuary beneath the sea. Then he smiled softly. The ocean had never hidden it. It had simply waited for those willing to travel with patience, kindness, and an open heart. With that peaceful thought, Elias turned toward the winding path leading home. The winding path carried Elias quietly to the foot of Ravenpoint Lighthouse. The old stone tower stood exactly as it always had, its weathered walls silver beneath the moonlight. A gentle breeze brushed across the cliffs, carrying the scent of salt, cedar, and distant pine. He rested one hand upon the wooden door. Its smooth surface bore the marks of many seasons. For a moment, he simply stood there, listening. The steady turning of the great beacon echoed softly from above, a sound so familiar that he had scarcely noticed it before. Now it felt like the slow heartbeat of an old friend. Elias opened the door. The warm scent of polished wood and lamp oil welcomed him inside. Nothing had changed. The brass rail along the spiral staircase still gleamed with quiet care. The stone steps curved upward, worn smooth by generations of careful feet. He began to climb. One step, then another. There was no hurry. Each footstep carried its own quiet rhythm. As he climbed higher, moonlight slipped through the narrow windows, painting gentle patterns across the ancient stone. For an instant, those silver beams reminded him of the glowing pathways beneath the Atlantic. He smiled, not because he wished to return, but because he knew the sanctuary was never truly far away. It lived wherever kindness endured. Halfway up the tower, Elias paused beside the small window overlooking the sea. The little boat rested peacefully at the dock below. The Atlantic stretched beyond it, calm beneath countless stars. He placed his hand lightly against the cool glass. Then, with a peaceful breath, he continued climbing toward the light that had been waiting all along. The spiral staircase ended beneath a familiar wooden hatch. Elias rested his hand upon the smooth brass handle. For a quiet moment, he listened. Above him, the great lantern turned with its steady, comforting rhythm, just as it had on every peaceful night before. He gently pushed the hatch open. The lantern room welcomed him with warm golden light dancing across polished glass. The great Fresnel lens revolved slowly around the brilliant lamp at its center. Every pane of crystal caught the light for an instant before gently releasing it toward the sleeping Atlantic. The room was exactly as he remembered. A small wooden table stood beside the wall. The old logbook rested where it always had. A carefully folded polishing cloth lay beside a brass oil can that had long since become a treasured keepsake. Elias smiled. He picked up the soft cloth and began wiping the glass. Not because it seemed dirty, but because every keeper before him had done the very same thing. Slow circles, gentle hands, patient care. As the crystal became perfectly clear, the first pale colors of morning appeared beyond the eastern horizon. Deep blue softened into violet. Violet welcomed quiet shades of rose and gold. The lantern's beam grew fainter against the coming daylight, yet it continued its faithful journey across the sea without hesitation. Elias understood why. A true light does not ask whether someone still needs it. It simply continues to shine until morning arrives. He placed the cloth back upon the table with quiet gratitude. Outside, the first seabird greeted the dawn. A new day had begun, just as countless others had before it, and just as countless others would after. Morning light slowly filled the lantern room. The great Fresnel lens had completed its final turn before resting quietly for the day. Beyond the glass, the Atlantic shimmered beneath the first golden rays of sunrise. Elias walked toward the small wooden table. The old logbook waited where generations of keepers had left it. Its leather cover had softened with age. Its corners were worn smooth by countless careful hands. He lifted it gently. The familiar scent of old paper and cedar drifted into the quiet room. Most pages contained simple notes. Clear skies. Light inspected. Fog before dawn. Supply boat arrived safely. Nothing remarkable. Only the faithful rhythm of ordinary days. Near the end of the book, Elias discovered one final handwritten entry. The ink had faded slightly with time. He read the words slowly. The sea asked for nothing today. Neither did the light. Both simply remained where they were needed. There was no signature. No date beyond the passing season. Only those 3 quiet lines. Elias closed the book for a moment. He looked toward the calm ocean. The words carried the same gentle wisdom as the promise beneath the Atlantic. Yet whoever had written them had left no hint of hidden sanctuaries or eternal flames. Perhaps they had known. Perhaps they had not. It no longer seemed important. The truth did not belong to secret places alone. Sometimes it appeared in the ordinary pages of an old logbook. Sometimes it lived inside the quiet habits of people who simply chose to care. Elias carefully returned the book to its place. Its story was not finished. It was waiting for the next peaceful entry. The old logbook rested quietly upon the wooden table. Sunlight streamed through the crystal panes of the lantern room, scattering warm reflections across the polished floor. Elias stood for a long moment before opening the book once more. He dipped the fountain pen into its small glass bottle of ink. A tiny drop gathered at the tip. He waited, not because he did not know what to write, but because some thoughts deserved to arrive in their own time. Beyond the windows, the Atlantic stretched peacefully toward the horizon. Fishing boats were already beginning their morning journeys. A few seabirds circled lazily above the cliffs. The lighthouse watched over them all without asking to be noticed. Elias lowered the pen to the page. His handwriting was calm and steady. He wrote only a few simple lines. The morning arrived quietly. The light greeted every traveler equally. May those who pass these shores always find calm seas and a safe way home. He placed the pen beside the book and allowed the ink to dry naturally. There was no mention of the hidden sanctuary, no mention of the radiant keeper, no mention of the eternal flame beneath the Atlantic. Some experiences became smaller when explained. Others grew stronger when carried quietly in the heart. Elias gently closed the leather cover. Outside, another wave reached the shore. Another breeze crossed the cliffs. Another ordinary day had begun. And in that beautiful ordinariness, he discovered something extraordinary. Home had always been its own kind of light. The day unfolded with the quiet certainty of the tides. Elias completed the familiar tasks of the lighthouse without hurry. He polished the brass railing, checked the great lantern, and walked the winding path along the cliffs where wild grasses swayed in the gentle ocean breeze. As afternoon slowly gave way to evening, the western sky softened into shades of amber, lavender, and pale rose. The Atlantic became a mirror. Every cloud floated upon its calm surface as though the sea had borrowed a second sky. Elias stepped onto the narrow balcony that circled the lantern room. The air was cool, comfortable. A few gulls drifted effortlessly above the cliffs before disappearing toward their quiet nests. The first evening star appeared, then another. He rested his hands upon the smooth iron railing and simply watched the horizon. Far in the distance, almost too far to notice, a small wooden boat moved peacefully across the water. No sails, no engine, only the slow, graceful rhythm of the sea. It was impossible to tell who sat inside. Perhaps an old fisherman returning home. Perhaps a traveler enjoying the calm evening. Or perhaps someone listening to a quiet invitation carried across the waves. Elias smiled. He did not wave. He did not call out. Some journeys begin best in silence. The little boat continued toward the place where sea and sky gently touched. Soon it became only a tiny shadow. then a single dark speck. Finally, it blended completely into the evening light. The lighthouse beam completed another patient circle across the Atlantic. As it always had, as it always would. The last colors of sunset slowly melted into twilight. Amber faded into violet. Violet welcomed the deep blue of approaching night. One by one, the first stars quietly appeared above the Atlantic, each taking its place without haste, as though they had all the time in the world. Elias stepped back inside the lantern room. The familiar silence greeted him like an old friend. He moved through the room with calm, practiced hands. He checked the polished glass of the great Fresnel lens. He adjusted the lantern with gentle care. He listened to the quiet ticking of the turning mechanism, steady and dependable, never asking for attention. Everything was ready. As the final ribbon of daylight slipped beyond the western horizon, Elias reached for the small brass lever. With one smooth motion, the great beacon awakened. Warm golden light blossomed inside the crystal lens. It grew brighter, not in a rush, but with quiet confidence. The first beam swept slowly across the ocean. It touched the cliffs. It crossed the sleeping waves. It reached toward the distant horizon where sea and sky became one. Elias watched its gentle journey. He smiled. Every evening, people spoke of the lighthouse lighting the night. But standing there, he saw something different. The beacon was not chasing away darkness. It was simply keeping a promise. To remain. To welcome. To guide. No matter how long the night might seem. Far below, the Atlantic whispered softly against the rocks. Far above, the stars continued their silent watch. And between the sea and the sky, the lighthouse breathed its faithful circle of light once more. Night settled gently over Ravenpoint. The lighthouse beam continued its slow, patient circle, sweeping across the Atlantic with the quiet confidence of an old friend who always kept their word. As the evening deepened, a thin blanket of fog drifted in from the open sea. It did not arrive all at once. It gathered softly, layer by layer, until the distant horizon faded into silver mist. From the lantern room, Elias watched the familiar transformation. The cliffs disappeared. The stars became faint. Even the moon seemed content to rest behind the gentle veil. Only the lighthouse beam remained clear. Its warm light reached into the fog without struggle, painting a quiet path through the whiteness before returning home once more. After several peaceful minutes, a small fishing boat appeared. At first, it was only a shadow. Then came the faint outline of its mast. Finally, a tiny lantern glowed near the bow. The boat moved slowly, not because the sea was rough, but because its captain respected the quiet uncertainty of the fog. As the lighthouse beam passed over the water, it briefly touched the little vessel. The captain removed his hat and gave a gentle nod toward the tower. Then he continued safely toward the harbor. Elias returned the nod, though he knew the distance was far too great for anyone aboard to notice. That did not matter. Not every kindness needed to be seen. Some were complete the moment they were given. The fishing boat disappeared into the peaceful harbor. The fog continued drifting across the Atlantic. And high above the sleeping sea, the lighthouse quietly kept watch, one faithful circle of light at a time. The little fishing boat had long since disappeared into the quiet harbor. Beyond the cliffs, the Atlantic rested beneath its blanket of silver mist, rising and falling with the slow breath of the night. Inside the lantern room, the great Fresnel lens continued its endless, graceful turning. Its steady rhythm filled the tower with a comforting sound, not loud enough to demand attention, only gentle enough to remind the heart that all was well. Elias settled into the old wooden chair beside the lantern. Generations of keepers had rested there before him. The arms of the chair had been polished smooth by countless patient hands. He leaned back and listened. The quiet ticking of the turning mechanism, the distant whisper of waves against the rocks below, the soft call of a night bird somewhere beyond the cliffs. Together, they formed a peaceful melody that needed no conductor. The hours passed unnoticed. The lighthouse never hurried. Neither did the sea. Every few moments, the warm beam completed another slow circle across the sleeping Atlantic. Always returning, always beginning again. Elias closed his eyes for a moment. Not to sleep, simply to enjoy the stillness. He remembered the eternal flame beneath the ocean. Then he smiled. The light above the sea and the light beneath it were never separate. One guided ships across the water. The other quietly guided hearts through life. Both asked for the same simple thing. Remain steady. Remain kind. Keep shining until morning comes. Outside, the eastern horizon held the faintest whisper of pale blue. Night was gently preparing to hand the world back to the dawn. And the lighthouse, faithful as ever, continued its quiet watch. The first light of morning arrived without announcement. There was no sudden change, only the quiet fading of night into day, as though the sky itself had taken a slow, peaceful breath. From the lantern room, Elias watched the eastern horizon awaken. A thin ribbon of silver appeared where the Atlantic met the sky. It slowly deepened into pearl, then soft rose, then gentle gold. Each color arrived patiently, making room for the next. The great Fresnel lens continued its faithful turning. Its warm beam, so bright during the night, now grew delicate beneath the growing daylight. Yet it did not hurry to fade. It completed each final circle with the same care as the first. Outside, the sea welcomed the morning. A pair of seabirds glided low across the calm water. Far beyond the harbor, a small sailing vessel opened its white canvas to the gentle breeze. The world was waking, not all at once, one quiet moment at a time. Elias opened the lantern room windows. Fresh ocean air drifted inside, carrying the familiar scent of salt, cedar, and dew resting upon the cliffside grass. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply. The air felt wonderfully ordinary, and somehow, that ordinary morning carried every extraordinary memory of the journey beneath the Atlantic. Not because the sanctuary had followed him home, but because peace had. The beacon completed one final sweep across the sea. Then, with the rising sun shining brightly over the Atlantic, Elias gently slowed the turning mechanism. The great light came to rest, not because its work was finished, but because the day had lovingly taken its place. The morning unfolded with quiet grace. After closing the lantern room, Elias stepped outside and began walking along the familiar path that wound across the cliffs of Ravenpoint. The grass still shimmered with tiny drops of dew. Wildflowers nodded gently in the ocean breeze. Far below, the Atlantic whispered against the rocks with the same patient rhythm it had carried for thousands of years. Everything looked exactly as it had the week before, yet every step felt new. Elias paused beside an old wooden bench overlooking the sea. Its weathered boards had been softened by countless seasons of wind, rain, and sunlight. He sat for a while without speaking. There was nothing that needed to be solved, nothing left to search for. The journey beneath the Atlantic had answered its questions without taking away its mystery. A family of seabirds circled above the cliffs. One young bird hesitated before leaving the safety of its rocky nest. Its wings fluttered uncertainly. Then, with a gentle leap, it caught the morning breeze. Not perfectly, not gracefully, but enough. The wind carried it onward. Elias watched until the little bird disappeared into the wide blue sky. He smiled quietly. Perhaps courage was not the absence of uncertainty. Perhaps it was simply trusting the next gentle breeze. He stood and continued along the path. Behind him, Ravenpoint Lighthouse watched over the sea. Ahead, the trail curved toward another ordinary day. The ocean sparkled beneath the morning sun. The lighthouse stood faithful upon the cliffs. And somewhere, hidden beneath the endless Atlantic, an eternal flame continued its calm, silent breath. Without needing to be seen, without ever asking to be remembered, simply shining. The day passed as gently as a cloud crossing the open sky. Morning welcomed afternoon. Afternoon slowly leaned into evening. Elias spent the hours as he always had. He carried fresh water up the spiral staircase. He polished the brass fittings until they reflected the golden light of the setting sun. He walked once around the lighthouse, checking each window, each hinge, and each weathered stone. None of these tasks felt small. Each was a quiet way of saying, "This place matters." As the sun began to sink beyond the Atlantic, Elias climbed to the lantern room once more. The western sky glowed with soft shades of amber and crimson. The sea reflected every color, turning the water into a vast canvas of light. He paused beside the great Fresnel lens. Months ago, he might have thought of it as a machine, a tool, something to maintain. Now he saw something different, not because the lens had changed, but because he had. Every careful movement of his hands, every polished pane of crystal. Every evening, he he welcomed the coming night. They were all part of the same quiet promise. Not a promise spoken once beneath the sea. A promise renewed in ordinary moments. Again, and again, and again. Outside, the first evening star appeared above the horizon. Elias smiled toward its gentle light. He no longer wondered whether the sanctuary beneath the Atlantic was real. He no longer searched for signs or hidden gateways. Some truths did not need repeating. They became part of the way a person lived. As the lighthouse lantern awakened for another peaceful night, Elias whispered the only words that seemed necessary. May this light help someone find their way. Then the great beacon turned slowly toward the sea. Faithful as always, quiet as ever. Evening settled softly over Ravenpoint. The lighthouse stood quietly upon its cliff, its warm beam moving across the Atlantic with the same patient rhythm it had kept for generations. Far below, the waves greeted the shore. Far above, the stars welcomed another peaceful night. Between them, the old tower continued its faithful watch. Inside, Elias tended the lantern with calm, familiar hands. There was no mystery left to solve. No hidden doorway waiting to be discovered. No distant voice calling his name. Only the quiet work of caring for a light that might help someone he would never meet. And somehow, that was more than enough. Across the world, other lights awakened. A small farmhouse placed a lantern in its window for a loved one traveling home. A harbor keeper lit a beacon at the end of a weathered pier. A mountain cabin glowed warmly against the gathering darkness. A family gathered around a fireplace, its gentle flames filling the room with comfort and laughter. Each light was different. Each served its own purpose. Yet all of them shared the same quiet promise. To welcome, to comfort, to guide. No applause followed these simple acts. No history books recorded them. The night accepted them without ceremony. The morning would arrive because it always did. But until then, these faithful lights would keep watch. The lighthouse beam swept once more across the sleeping Atlantic. Somewhere beyond the horizon, a traveler looked up and quietly smiled, knowing that home was growing closer with every passing wave. And high above the sea, the stars continued shining, not because they wished to be admired, but because shining was simply their nature. The night grew wonderfully quiet. The Atlantic breathed its slow, endless rhythm against the ancient cliffs, just as it had long before the first lighthouse was built, and just as it would long after every story had been told. Ravenpoint Lighthouse stood peacefully beneath a sky filled with gentle stars. Its warm beacon continued its faithful circle across the sleeping sea. Steady, patient, kind. Inside the lantern room, Elias rested in the familiar wooden chair beside the great Fresnel lens. There was nothing more to discover, nothing more to prove. The light was shining. The sea was calm, and that was enough. Far below, gentle waves reached the shore before quietly returning to the ocean once more. The wind wandered softly through the tall grasses upon the cliffs. Somewhere in the distance, a single seabird offered one final evening call before the world settled into complete stillness. If, someday, you should find yourself standing beside a lonely lighthouse, if you hear the waves speaking in their quiet language, or if you notice a single welcoming light shining across the darkness, perhaps you will remember Ravenpoint. Perhaps you will remember Elias. Or perhaps you will simply pause for a peaceful moment and breathe with the sea. Because every kind word, every welcoming smile, every patient heart becomes a light for someone else. And somewhere, beyond sight, the ocean remembers. The stars remember. The quiet flame beneath the Atlantic remembers. Not with voices, not with monuments, but with the gentle certainty that no act of kindness is ever truly lost. Now the lighthouse keeps its peaceful watch. The sea continues its endless song. The stars remain where they have always been. And the night, calm and gentle, lovingly carries every traveler toward a new morning. So, as the waves whisper against the shore and the beacon completes one last quiet circle across the Atlantic, may your dreams be peaceful. May you,